Welcome to Only for Your Ears and today's episode. But before we start, I'd like to say a big thank you to people that have liked, shared, and subscribed to this channel. It helps with the algorithms, and it also helps to support the channel. Thank you very much. This is appreciated. Now for today's episode 44, The Dryad, by Hans Christian Andersen, which I've renamed as The Wonder of the Nature Spirit. The structure will remain the same, starting off with a summary where I'll digress with some highlighted sentences and give a brief reflection. Then we'll move on to my critical review with how this fairy tale plays in today's society by using some films to give a parallel to the fairy tale. Then I'll move on to my questions, which will be, I'll give an afterthought, and then I'll give my question, which is a food for thought question. So that will be quite engaging, and it will allow you to participate if you want to leave a comment. And last but not least, the trigger points, the parts of this fairy tale which triggered me, and I will share some of those trigger points too. So let's begin with today's episode, The Dryad, or The Wonders of the Nature Spirit, by Hans Christian Andersen, that tells the story of a dryad, a nature spirit living in an ancient oak tree in the forest. The dryad has the ability to see and hear the world around her through the lenses and the senses of the tree, but she yearns for more than her limited perspective. I digress. The grass is always greener on the other side, isn't it? It sounds like the dryad is getting itchy feet, so to speak. Reflection, the consequences of desire. The story also highlights the dangers of indulging in one's desires without fully understanding the consequences. The dryad's yearning for excitement leads her to abandon her home and her connection to nature. I digress. This is a fatal flaw of the innocence. We often sacrifice our humble background to chase after a lifestyle which is out of sync with which we are versus who we want to be at a specific time. And it sometimes comes at an awful price. Once in the city, she realizes the glamour of the urban life comes at a price. Pollution, loss of connection to the nature that she was once used to, and the impermanence of beauty. I digress. Well, the good thing is she's becoming appreciative of the beauty that she left behind. The story serves as a cautionary tale about the potentials and pitfalls of chasing dreams without considering the potential cost. One day, she hears of the wonders of Paris and the great world exposition taking place there. The dryad becomes consumed by a desire to experience the city and its marvels for herself. I digress. The spirit is the lifeblood to the soul of a living being, and once this exits the body, for example, it dies. In response to her wish, the oak tree dies, and the dryad is released from it, now free to travel to Paris. I digress, only to realize she made an uninformed decision on a whim. Reflection, the allure of the unknown. The dryad's fascination with Paris represents the human desire to explore the unknown and experience new things. The city embodies excitement, beauty, and novelty, and the dryad is longing for it and can be seen and it can be seen as a metaphor for the human quest for the human for quest for adventure and discovery. I digress. The desire to have that sense of adventure without a care in the world, however, with wonder and freedom come a responsibility the Dryad is unaware of. Upon arriving in Paris, the Dryad is initially enchanted by the city's beauty, grandeur, and exciting atmosphere of the World Exposition. I digress, I can see it now, all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, with stars in her eyes. Welcome to Hollywood. What's your dream? Do you have a dream? I can hear the remnants of the film Pretty Woman as the fantasy ends. She marvels at the Eiffel Tower, the grand pavilions, and the various displays of art and innovation. However, as she spends more time in the city, she begins to feel overwhelmed by the noise, pollution, and the constant hustle and bustle. I digress. The love affair with the romantic city ends tragically as the rose-colored glasses are abruptly ripped off and a hard dose of reality breaks the illusion as reality sinks in. Reflection. The consequences of desire. The story also highlights the dangers of indulging in one's desires without fully understanding the consequences. I digress. Haven't we all been hypnotized with the short-term satisfaction over the truth of our essence? The Dryad's yearning for Paris leads her to abandon her home and her connection to nature. I digress. The ruby red rose petals that lit her pathway to Paris have dimmed. Once in the city, she realizes that the glamour of urban life comes at a price: pollution, loss of connection to nature, and the impermanence of beauty. I digress. How unfortunate for the Dryad to realize that life isn't greener on the other side of the tracks. The story serves as a cautionary tale about the potential pitfalls of chasing dreams without considering the potential costs. I digress. This is so true. Slowly, the Dryad starts to miss the tranquility and natural beauty of the forest home. I digress. A lot of people have moved out of cities, especially families with young children, pollution and economics, and the need to live in nature, even if it's in the suburbs. She realizes that in pursuing her desire to experience the city, she has lost the peace and harmony she once had within her as a tree. As her longing for the forest grows, the Dryad withers away and dies, her spirit returning to the now dead oak tree. The Dryad is a poignant tale that explores themes of longing, the clash between nature and urbanization, and the consequences of pursuing one's desire without fully understanding the potential costs. The story also highlights the dangers of indulging in one's desire without fully understanding the consequences. My critical review on how this fairy tale plays in today's society. The fairy tale made me revisit my late teens to early 20s when I was ecstatic about traveling to New York City on vacation to see the bright lights of Broadway, only to be disappointed by this city called the Big Apple when I decided to live there. It was as though my rose-colored glasses had been ripped off my face by my jealous, narcissistic mother saying, "That's what you get for abandoning me." Nothing but a world of hurt, which I thought I was escaping. Out of the frying pan and into the fire, the Dryad had a legitimate desire to explore the world outside of her comfort zone. I think as a spirit, she was unaware of how important she is as a living organism. Once the spirit exits the body it has resided in, no matter how long it dies, the allure of enchanting city intoxicates her spirit and leads her to forget about who she really is and, in a sense, her responsibilities her responsibilities to the world of nature around her. I think this story is an important reminder of the kind of obligations we have once we leave our comfort zones and branch out into the world. The old saying, "You'll see how life is when you leave home," is true. This conveys we have the freedom to do what we want within reason, but we must pay the consequences of our decisions. Unfortunately, the Dryad pays a terrible price for one decision she made, whereas we at least have the opportunity to change our mistakes instead of immediately paying for this with our lives. Of course, once some have more chances than others. And now I will use these three films to illustrate the parallels of how this fairy tale plays for me in today's society. So let's begin with Indecent Proposal. But I'll read a digress to introduce it. I digress. I can see it now, all the bright-eyed and bushy-tailed with stars in their eyes. Welcome to Hollywood. What's your dream? Do you have a dream? I can hear the remnants of the film Pretty Woman as the fantasy ends. Now, in Indecent Proposal, I'm sure it's an old film, so some people may recognize it, other people may not. David and Diana are married high school sweethearts living in California. Diana works as a real estate agent. Basically, she sells houses. While David hopes to establish himself as an architect by designing their dream home. The couple invest everything they have in David's project, purchasing a beachfront property in Santa Monica and beginning construction. But the recession leaves Diana without houses to sell and David without a job. In desperate need of $50,000 to save their land from being repossessed, they decide to go to Las Vegas to see if they can get some money, determined to win at least $50,000 at the casino. Diana catches the eye of a billionaire, John Cage, who's played by Robert Redford, absolutely gorgeous, while David wins over $25,000 at the crap table. Reveling in their wins, Diana assures David that she loves him regardless of the money. The next day, they lose everything at roulette. Oh, how awful. Leaving the casino, they notice a crowd gathered to watch John Cage, or Gage, I should say, play Baccarat. Gage asks Diana to join him for good luck, and she makes a winning crap roll on his 1 million bet. As thanks, Gage insists on paying for the Murphys' stay, giving them a lavish hotel suite and a dress he saw Diana admire. After an enjoyable evening together, Gage offers the couple $1 million. Oh my God, $1 million. Allow him to spend the night with Diana. Oh goodness. But she and David refuse. Well, that's nice. Oh my word. And here's John Cage's famous line when he speaks to Diana again: everybody has a price. The truth is, in this phrase, is a stinging reminder of how money has a chokehold over us as a society. And at times, we have all felt quite desperate. Anyway, Diana and John end up having a short-lived romantic relationship, and their marriage falls apart. It was mainly David's jealousy that pushed the ill-fated couple together. The $1 million David received for loaning his wife out to John goes to support a local zoo. The relationship between Diana and John ends, and Diana finds David at the bridge. He first proposed to Diana, and she tells him that she loves him, and they make up. Now, the afterthought, my summary of it, it just goes to show life isn't always greener on the other side, no matter how much money you have. It's so true, people. David always doubted Diana's love for him because she had never told him that she loved him before, or at least he wasn't convinced of her sentiments. And as men always feel like they should be the main provider in the household, David felt undeserving of his wife when they fell into bankruptcy and their land was eventually repossessed. He always felt extremely jealous when he finds John's contact number amongst Diana's belonging. Although the relationship between Diana and John was validated romantically, it wasn't reciprocal in terms of real love. The non-committal businessman catches feelings for the person he couldn't buy, recognizing although everybody has a price, money can't always buy love. Ironically, he lost at his own game, and David and Diana restore their shaky marriage, this time showing each other how much they love each other openly. So the food for thought question is, why did David indirectly push his wife into the relationship with John? Leave a comment if you want to. Appreciate it. The next one is Maria, full of grace. I digress. This is a fatal flaw of innocence. We often sacrifice our humble background to chase after life, which is out of sync with who we are versus with who we want to be at a specific time. This is a really, really good film, people, and I recommend that you see it. It's about a 17-year-old Colombian girl, Maria Alvarez. She works in a sweatshop like conditions at a flower plantation. Her income helps support her family, including her unemployed sister, who is single mother. But after unjust treatments from her boss, she quits her job, dethorning roses, despite her family's vehement disapproval. Of course, they're going to disapprove. She's bringing in most of the money. Shortly thereafter, Maria discovers she's pregnant by her boyfriend, and he suggests marriage, but she declined because she does not feel she loves him, although he loves her. On her way to Bogota to find a new job, she is offered a position as a drug mule. Desperate, she accepts the risky offer and swallows 62 wrapped pellets of drugs and flies to New York with her friend Blanca, who has also been recruited as a drug mule. The new drug mules arrive in New York City, and the customs officers are suspicious of Maria and the cash that she has on her. She tells them that she's pregnant, so she avoids being x-rayed with the drug pellets in her stomach. Smart, smart move. Anyway, Maria, so they arrive at the motel where each mule has to pass the pellets they swallowed. Lucy also arrives at the motel, and she befriended Maria, and they're around the same age, but she has difficulty passing the pellets. And what happens next is that they murder her, they open her up, and they remove the drugs that's inside of her that cannot be passed. She's having a difficult time, and they drag her out. Maria suggests to Blanca, let's get out of here when they go. So they do, they get out, and she has nowhere to sleep. And the only place that she knows is Lucy's sister. So she goes to Lucy's sister's house, and she tells them what happened. She tells them that she has nowhere to sleep. And then the sister finds out that Lucy has died. And she said, look, I want you both out of here. So they both leave, and they decide to give the pellets that they passed to the drug lords, and they pay them the money to go back to Colombia. Well, they're about to go to Colombia, and Blanca gets on the plane, but Maria decides not to get on the plane, and she decides to stay in New York to just create a life for herself. I think that was an interesting decision. But anyway, my afterthought is, I've never seen this film, but it sounds authentic to the current situations, times. Oh, there's another part of the film that I did not mention, and that is when Lucy dies, what she does is that the money that she had on her before she got paid, she sends Lucy's body home and makes sure that she has a proper funeral. And this, for me, is a very, very important moment. So I've never seen the film, but Maria knew she couldn't continue working in that awful conditions in the sweatshop, while being the breadwinner for the family with a baby on the way. So she took a desperate measure for desperate times. She wanted to make good money to help all those concerned. Blanca, her boyfriend, was a security just to help her figure out what she wanted to do with their relationship. Lucy's death reminded Maria of who she is. So even though she thought, like a lot of immigrants, they sought after a better life financially, but they never really quite forget their roots of where they come from, hopefully. And this is what happens to Maria when she sends back Lucy's body as a reminder of who she is, a decent girl looking for a bright future for herself and her family. After they get their money, Maria decides to start a new life in New York, after she's tested the terrain, and Blanca goes home. I think they know full well that they didn't love each other enough to get married. And that's why he was all right about it. All in all, I think Maria is clear about what she wants in the end, but she doesn't lose her decency as a person. Oh, how this rings a bell with me. Okay, so, and also Maria, she just, as I said, she never lost her decency. And that's, I think, the most important part, that not losing the decency. And this is why the film is called Maria Full of Grace, because although she stepped into a very dangerous situation, being a drug mule, she still had heart. She still knew where she came from. So the question is, food for thought question is, why didn't Maria lose her grace after all she had experienced? Yes, why didn't she lose her grace? And I think I mentioned from my point of view, she doesn't lose sight of who she is. Okay, the last one is Pretty Woman. Let's listen. I digress. How unfortunate for the Dryad to realize that life isn't greener on the other side of the tracks. Now, Pretty Woman is considered a fantasy, but there's some really strong parallels in this film. Mr. Lewis, Richard Gere, a major businessman who is dedicated to buying companies in crisis at low prices to sell them in small parts, meets prostitute. Today, in today's world, it's called a sex worker named Vivian, while looking for his hotel. He meets the stereotype of a person of low social class with serious economic problems and in a situation of despair, surrounded in a world marked by drugs, despite not being a drug user. The irony, because of her situation, she is critical and distant with the upper class social classes. And the billionaire, who is principal, should be nothing more than clients. But contrary to all the stereotypes, she is smart and classy when she has the chance. And he can be scrupulous and romantic when he's out of tension and disagreements that come from a relationship between people who are so similar, but whose money makes them so different. Both Edward and Vivian are disappointed with life after their relationship changes everything. Both of their worlds are rocked when love appears in this relationship. They're both about money. They're both about getting as much money as possible. They're both even robotic when it comes to emotions. When she has sex, it's a business deal. When he deals with all these clients, it's a business deal. He has no feelings. But when they come together, these two people that come from different parts of the world and they come together, it's magic because it's like they recognize we're so alike. It's a great, great film. And in a lot of ways, you can see that they both looked for something greener on the other side. Life was better. Life was better in the big city. Life was better chasing after his father's legacy and making all this money. But he wasn't happy. So the afterthought. I think both Edward and Vivian had illusions of how great life could be in the fast-paced urban world. Edward followed his father's business lineage just to compete with his legacy instead of building something for himself. And by the end of this film, he decides, I'm not going to do what my father always did, and I'm not going to do what I've always done. What I'm going to do is what I really want to do, is what I want to build something. I want to make something and say, I contributed to this company. And so that's what he does. Vivian tries to escape the stereotype of being rendered useless without brains and falls into economic desperation, only to become a sex worker and amid the disillusionment of the city life away from suburbia. However, it doesn't diminish Vivian's basic decency. She was from suburbia, but she was just a decent, good person and actually very smart and street smart too. This surprises Edward as he knows how money can corrupt. One with the bright lights of the city, especially one as desperate as Vivian. She remains the same. She doesn't change. I think they both realized their connection was special the moment they had their first professional date, but hid their feelings behind professionalism. Vivian brings out the authentic Edward, and Edward encourages Vivian to invest in herself and her potential. Beautiful film, as far as I'm concerned. Very simple, romantic comedy, but a beautiful film. Food for thought. Do you think either Edward or Vivian ever experienced love before? Okay, so that's the question. Okay, leave a comment if you'd like. Now let's move on to the trigger point. The economic desperation of living in a foreign country, receiving inadequate wages, and having jealous relatives told you it wouldn't work out, didn't I? My move to New York City in the early years. Look, let me tell you something. When I moved to New York City as a dancer, I was really running away from living with my narcissistic mother. And I wanted to be different from who I really am. I wanted to be this buoyant, extroverted, dynamic woman and dancer. And so I went to one of the loudest dance schools in New York City so I could change. But it didn't work. After a year or almost a year and a half, it turned out that that wasn't for me. It never changed who I was at bottom. And that was basically an introvert. It didn't change who I was when I lived in New York City. You know, I could have found somebody to connect with and have them pay for me and, you know, exchange sex and, you know, I'm getting to a relationship and have them support me. But I didn't. I wanted to support myself. That independent streak that I had from the very beginning that helped me come to New York was on display. I was also really quite resourceful. But what happened is that it didn't change me. I went to a school that was very secluded. It didn't change my introverted nature. I was still the same. My accent never changed. That was still the same. And I was just introverted. It didn't change. My independence never changed. I never forgot who I was. My creativity never changed. I thought that I would fit in it being in New York City. Well, that never changed because I didn't fit in. And so I can tell you the first couple of years, I so desperately wanted to escape because I felt that I had made a big mistake. In some ways, I had made a big mistake. But the only thing that prevented me from not running back to England, it wasn't my mother because my mother had already got married. It wasn't my mother. It was the fact that no matter where I went in the world, my character, I realized that my character, just like Maria, full of grace, was never going to change. It was going to remain the same. I hadn't forgotten who I was. And I couldn't really change who I was because I've always been a very kind of different person. The next one, experiencing homelessness, a spiritual upgrade, and becoming the real me in a sense. In found my real home and freedom from within. Well, experiencing homelessness, I experienced homelessness, and at the same time of experiencing homelessness in the middle of 2022, I was also, which I was unaware of, but I knew something was happening to me. And it felt as though I had no control over it. It was a spiritual awakening I was going through. I was going through a spiritual movement in my being. And even though I'm a control freak in a lot of ways, I like to be in control. And I'm independent, I'm organized, and I like to be in control. It felt as though I wasn't. And it's not until I arrived in Vancouver that I could really feel the wheels in motion. And my spiritual connection with spirit, with God, was getting stronger and stronger. I wanted to make a new life for myself yet again in a different country, thinking that if I left, Spain, things would improve. Well, things did change, but it wasn't the best place for me to be. But it was a good place for me to realize a lot about myself, to recognize more of who I am as a person, the original self-suit person. So that was great. Well, I wanted to stay, but God wanted something different. And let me tell you something, God and Spirit had their way. They made sure I had no money by the time I was supposed to come back. The shelter paid for my one-way ticket back to Barcelona, which was over $700, and it was first class. And they also paid for an Airbnb for me to stay in for 3 weeks until I had my interview with the social services to see if they could put me in what they call a shelter, a women's shelter. So I only spent 1 week, what you could say, inconvenienced, and that was sleeping in the hospital waiting room. And that was it. But I had it did not matter whether I was in Barcelona or in Vancouver. I had who I am as a person did not change me. And what was interesting is that I realized towards the end of my stay that I can't really say that I made a mistake going to Vancouver, but what I can say is, what I really can say is that I realize now I'm back here in Barcelona. I can't really say that I really liked Vancouver. I think it's a beautiful city. I had some interesting experiences there. I had an incredible spiritual, karmic family transmutation, which was phenomenal for me. And I'm so grateful that I had that. But in general, I didn't really like Vancouver that much for me as a person to live there. But to visit, it's a beautiful, beautiful country, Canada, and Vancouver is breathtaking. I sought a new environment and I sought a new life. But what I realized is that in order for me to have a really fresh start, I had to clean up things that I had left behind here in Barcelona and not just run away. And I'm really grateful that I returned. The last one is The Price of Fame. This is about Matthew Perry. Now, Matthew Perry, really sad. He was on a sitcom for about, I don't know, 10, 15 years called Friends, and it was very well known. He died quite recently. I think he died either the beginning of this year or the ending of last year. He was only 54 years old, or maybe even younger. And he was a good actor. But I can honestly say that seeking fame and being in the glare of the spotlight and being famous does not heal the inner demons of a traumatic childhood, which is what happened to him. He came from a really traumatic childhood, and all fame did was shine the light not only on him, but for him personally, it must have shone the light on all the stuff that he was running away from. And he had a terrible time with addictions and drugs and alcohol. It was really tragic. I think he died of a massive heart attack, and it was connected to drinking and drugs. Most unfortunate. You know, you never stop being who you are, people, at bottom. No matter how famous you want to be, no matter how much attention you want to have and get, no matter how much you want to fill that hole in your heart and that sense of abandonment and abuse and hurt, you still carry that with you until you learn how to mend it, mend a broken heart, until you learn how to face your own demons, whether you're rich or not, whether you move to another country or not, you still, pardon me, have to face yourself. Anyway, this is the end of today's episode. Thank you very much for listening. And I'd like to end with my favorite phrase. Healing is a lifelong blessing, gift, and lesson we give ourselves, mind, body, and soul. Healing is a lifelong blessing, gift, and lesson we give ourselves, mind, body, and soul. Goodbye for today.